In this movie, let's finish off our animation by adding a distortion effect such as warp. Remember in the previous movie, we took our 3 layers and precomposed them into the Apple Group Precomp. I can still edit or animate any of these layers individually if I need to, but I can also apply effects to the group, which is what we were looking for. Now it's worth pointing out that when I precomposed and I created this precomp, how did it know what size to make the precomp? If I open composition settings, you'll see it has all the specifications of a DV comp, 29.97 frame rate, it's 5 seconds in duration, and it has a blue background. All of these specifications came from the main comp. If you check its specifications, it has exactly the same composition settings. And the reason it needs to do that is because some of the attributes that you precomposed, such as the layer's position, are based on the width and height of the comp. And the reason the duration has to be the same is that other attributes, such as in and out points or trimming, are based on the duration of the comp. So again, when you precompose with move all attributes, your precomp will be the same size as your main comp. In the next movie, we'll precompose with leave all attributes, and you'll see how important that distinction can be. So let's finish off our animation. In the main comp, I've selected the Apple Group Precomp layer. In the Effects and Presets panel, I'll just double-click the warp effect, and that will apply it to my selected layer. In the Effect Controls panel, you'll see it doesn't have too many options. There's warp style and warp axis, and the bend value is how you control how distorted the layer is. So I'm going to set up a simple animation. First, I'll select a different warp style. And there's lots to choose from, so feel free to explore them. I'll select Squeeze, the last one. By scrubbing bend, I can get an idea of what's going to happen. I'll start off with the maximum bend value of -100, and at time 0, I'll turn on the stopwatch to make my first keyframe. And at 1 second 10 frames, I can see there's a layer marker here, which coincides with the motif that moves across in the background layers. So this might be a good place to finish the animation. I'll press U to see my keyframes, and I'll change the bend value back to 0. A little later on, set the work area, and let's run preview and see what we have. It's interesting enough, but it's a little robotic, so let's check out the graph editor. And here I can see that the default keyframes are linear. If I double-click the word bend to select both keyframes in the graph editor, I can click the Easy Ease button at the bottom of the timeline to ease both keyframes. Let's see what that looks like. It's a little more interesting, but I don't think I like how slow it is at the beginning. So instead, I'd like to speed up the beginning. So let's see how this looks. That's a bit more energetic. And maybe we'll do something like overshooting the last keyframe. And by overshooting, I mean that I'm pulling the handle for the value graph, so the layer will actually reach its final value, then go past it, and then come back to its target value. Let's see how that looks. That's a little more fun. And I can continue to play with this overshooting. And of course, if I don't want it to overshoot, I can return the handle to a straight line, adding the Shift key to make sure I don't accidentally overshoot. But I think I quite like the overshoot, so let's put that back. So I'm finished with the graph editor, so let's return to our normal view, and let's see what other tidying up we can do. Now, one of the things I'm noticing is that the drop shadow is looking a little dark. So I'm looking in the effects controls and I don't see a drop shadow. And then I remember that the drop shadows are in the precomp. If I select my 3 individual layers in the precomp and press E, there I can see the 3 drop shadows, 1 on each layer. So I have a couple of problems with this setup. Now, if you remember, when we started this project, I pointed out that this wasn't a very efficient way of working, because every time I edited one drop shadow, I had to remember to apply the values to the other 2 drop shadows. But I think in this context, it would serve me better to actually move the drop shadow to the top comp. If I did that, I'd only have 1 drop shadow effect to work with, because I could apply it to the group of layers. So let's fix this. I'll return to Apple Group, I'll select the drop shadow, and I think that value Looks pretty good. So we'll copy the effect, Edit, Copy, Command-C on Mac, Control-C on Windows. So we'll copy the entire drop shadow effect. Now I don't want to remove all the effects, just the drop shadow. I'll leave the tritone. I'll select the drop shadow on Wired Fruit and hit Delete. Select the drop shadow on the subtitle and delete it. So in the pre-comp there is no drop shadow on any layer. I'll bring the main comp forward, select my nested Apple group layer, and paste my drop shadow. Now I can easily edit the drop shadow effect, which is applied to the group of layers, and I have a much more efficient workflow. So as you can see, precomposing a group of layers is very useful. But when you're done, spend a moment and see if there's anything you can do to make editing the entire project a little more efficient. So I hope that gives you some ideas. When you're building a hierarchy of comps, you have parenting, nesting, and precomposing. In the next movie, we'll look at precomposing a single layer, and in that case, you'll have a couple of options to choose from.